Yeah, we are very excited about this webinar because our topic from data to dollars is super relevant for anyone who wants to use product claims, as a result either of their own clinical trial or an ingredient study. And today we'll explore how to create powerful marketing campaigns based on study results, what resonates with consumers, how to effectively communicate complex data, and also give you a couple of examples and case studies of best practices on how to present clinical trial data. I think that will be really great. And to tell you quickly about Citruslabs. I'm Susanne. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Citruslabs. We are the fastest growing provider of clinical studies for brands. We conduct studies from start to finish. We work with a lot of brands in the health and wellness industry, and we cover cosmetics, supplements, superfoods, and also devices. And we work with world-class brands like Hum Nutrition, Saie Beauty, Your Super, and also A System. And our mission really is to elevate brands with research-backed product claims that drive business growth. All of our studies are customized, and we typically involve questionnaires as well as objective data measurements through blood markers, stool markers, skin markers, digital markers, before and after photos, you name it. And we can conduct very simple single group clinical trials, but also multi-arm randomized control studies. Now, enough about that. I am joined today by two of my team members, Bethany, our marketing manager, and Samantha, Sam, a member of our research team and principal investigator. And Sam and Bethany, do you quickly want to introduce yourselves as well?
I can jump in. I'm the one that's in Melbourne today. I've started working in research in recent years, but historically I've been working as a health practitioner and also much more consumer facing. So my role has transformed over the years. So now I'm more deeply into clinical research and the writing side. And I've got a very good vision for how it's translated to the customers. So having worked for Adidas as the global nutrition lead, also having worked with Your Super as their nutrition lead for innovation and focusing also on research and new products. I'm very passionate and excited and nerdy about herbal medicine and nutritional medicine. They're both my first bachelor degrees. And then I went on to study public health and pharmacy and communication. So I'm really across health science, very excited to be able to share this topic with you all, because it's really exactly that, the translation of the science to make it useful and connecting. So that's me.
And I'm Bethany. I'm the marketing manager for Citruslabs. So when you do a clinical trial with us, I provide best practices and advise you on how best to use your results within your marketing, whether that's through graphics, building a clinical trial webpage, implementing those into your social media. I know everyone enjoys their role within Citruslabs, but I like to think mine is the fun side of the science because I really get to connect with our brands in taking this data and really implementing it, because there are really two reasons why you go for a clinical trial. Is one, if you're staying compliant with FTC or FDA regulations, but two, if you want to use that data to boost your marketing, build your consumer trust, prove that your product does what you say it's going to do. That's really where you might need some guidance on how to take the scientific data and make it into that messaging and the materials that you need to communicate that. So I'm very excited to share some tips for you guys today.
Perfect. Well, then let's dive right in. Okay, the first question is actually for Sam. As you know, the health and wellness industry is somewhat controversial among scientists, and especially those that practice traditional Western medicine. Sam, you are a scientist. You eat and breathe research, and you're all for an evidence-based approach to health and wellness. And how do you actually reconcile these two approaches, and what can brands actually do to address this skepticism from scientists and specifically traditional Western trained practitioners?
I think in general, scientists get very excited at the prospect of brands and different companies using what they've done to promote their product or promote what they're doing. Scientists always get excited when what we've been working on gets used. So there's definitely always opportunity for collaboration. I think a lot of the sort of conflict and clashing can occur when in the scientific field, researchers might feel that their data, that their science has been misrepresented, or the classic, they've only read the heading. So I think if we're looking for a connection, because ultimately when marketing and consumer facing communication meet science, there's so much opportunity for connection. But if we're misrepresenting it, or if we're only reading the headline and using it for that, it's not an accurate reflection of what the science was, and there's so much more potential there. So I suppose accurately reflecting what the study showed, so and selecting science that really matches to, so taking those extra steps to make sure that what we're wanting to communicate is very much aligned with the research that we are referring to. And that's why when companies do clinical trials on their product, this is the highest standard, because then we're not breaking down the product just into the pieces of its ingredients, because that can also be very difficult to refer to, for example, a study on one nutrient or herb and say, well, this nutrient, this herb has been shown to have this effect. And then sometimes it's translated to, therefore, this product has this effect. However, it was this particular ingredient, this particular dose, in this particular form, and that might not be reflected in the product. So it's just those little details that it's very well helped if you have a scientist on the team, or if you have a good, strong relationship with companies like Citruslabs doing research, because then you're guided on how to best use the science, and that actually becomes a mutually beneficial relationship between science and marketing or consumer-facing education, because there is an abundance of opportunity there to enhance for both fields, for science and for businesses, that would bring up the benefits for both sides. So yeah, a lot of creativity in being able to change practice to what's been done before, and a lot of collaboration, because we do actually work well together when we find all those connections.
Yeah, I agree. And what you mentioned in terms of ingredient research, that it was a particular ingredient, particular form, particular dosage, but also particular study participants, right? So all of this plays a big part. And that the next question is more for both of you, probably. What can brands actually do to mitigate skepticism also from consumers? Because I know that many of our clients and many brands in general, when they make claims, right, they get questions around, well, has this actually been studied?
I've just brief from my notes. I love this question. From my point of view, the intentional language is important. And the great experience I've had with Citruslabs is when we're doing our reports and we're guiding the brands of what to say. And also you're quite specialized in this, Bethany, is the intentional language of making sure it accurately reflects the evidence that we've got, and being very prepared and comfortable with challenging questions. So if a customer has a challenging question, what can often happen is on the consumer interaction side, that there's a hesitation of I'm not sure, or that's a little bit of a complicated one, we haven't had that question before. Any degree of skepticism is very close to curiosity. They're very close to each other. So if someone's approaching you and you're sensing, or you're definitely hearing a degree of skepticism, that's very easily turned around to a very meaningful connection, because they're already invested. If we're skeptical, we're invested we're curious, we're interested, and we're ready to be impressed. We're ready to be receiving information that might change our mind. So I suppose whenever we're not sure, we can say, I can get back to you on that, or that's exciting. We have a new question here where we can explore it more, but sort of leaning in, because skepticism is an invitation. And I always think of it that it's so easily turned around. And once it's turned into curiosity, you've got something meaningful that can be a very long-lasting trust.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I would add to that, embrace your skeptic consumers, because those will ultimately turn out to be your biggest champions, because they, like you said, they have that curiosity, they have that interest in your brand, they're doing their research. So to reduce that skepticism, it's up to you to be transparent and provide them with the information that they're looking for. I know in marketing, it can be tempting to kind of put a spin on something or polish it up, but really it's your responsibility and to be a brand with integrity to share all the details. What we're going to share today are tips on how to take the scientific data and make it more understandable, but we're not sharing how to take the scientific data and spin it to make yourselves look better. Another point to reduce that consumer skepticism, and I'll say this over and over again, is cite your sources. It's not good enough anymore to just say third-party clinical testing. What does that really mean? Consumers are smarter and savvier than ever. They know how to do their research. They're looking into specific ingredients. So if you can share who tested your product, that gives that consumer even more confidence in selecting your product over a competitor who might be more vague in their language.
Yeah, I like it. Sometimes I feel that many brands see their clinical studies as something that they do, and then they kind of bury the probably also important information in the ground. Nobody should see it, right? Everybody just see the claims. There's an asterisk on it and says, like, based on the clinical study with X number of participants and 12 weeks intervention, but there are no details. So Bethany, I really like what you mentioned, that being transparent, provide them in terms of consumers with information that they're actually looking for, and citing sources. I think the transparency is really, really important. And next question is around leveraging scientific research and clinical trial results to substantiate claims. So Sam, you have worked for USuper. USuper did a couple of clinical studies actually with us. And how, from your experience, how do you actually then use this information from the clinical trial to substantiate claims, and then you also differentiate the brand in the market?
So it's actually very helpful and exciting, because within the clinical trial results, there are opportunities that came up that we might not have thought of before. So it enhances brand creativity. And I think something that's very important when brands are doing clinical trials is interdepartmental connection. So we had the research team and the innovation team, the new product development team, we had the marketing team, we had the customer experience team. And so that as results are available, that we're sharing it throughout the company, so that different departments and also different team members can see potential opportunities that might make their work level enhanced, because they're able to connect more in terms of the creativity in their marketing campaigns. They're able to be more specific in their wording, potentially also more concise in exactly what we want to say, because we have the evidence there. There's a sense of security and confidence because we know that this is exactly what happened. So there is a story there that we can tell, and it's not based on an external source. It's a specific source because we know that our product has had this result. And we also have the stories within what the experience was, what the expectations are in terms of the timeline, to understand what happens and how long it takes, and the potential mode of action, which is often missing when products are very focused on marketing based on the ingredients. sometimes it's difficult to be able to explain the connection between what makes what happen and how. So yeah, the creativity in terms of the storytelling and the connection between the departments to see opportunities in order to utilize every aspect of the study results. The methodology also can be very helpful if we can explain what we actually studied and how and why. And it also makes it easier to provide realistic expectations and give a guide for consumers on how to get the best out of this product and how to achieve exactly what they're seeking. So it can be very validating and very trust building as well to ensure that, it create the whole dynamic between the company, that the connection is there, and that translates on many levels to reach the customer experience.
Yeah, I love that. It gives a sense of security and confidence. And I think this is also the goal of a study, right? You're making claims, and then, you should feel confident that the claims you are making are actually, valid, substantiated, and that your product eventually, right, makes an impact and works. I think this is the most important part here. And now you have the data to back this up. Now let's actually talk about, how you're actually sorting through and organizing this data. That's probably one for both of you, but I want to start with Bethany, because this is something that you do almost on a daily basis now. From your perspective, what are the most important and impactful data points from the clinical trial results that also resonate with consumers?
Yeah, so typically the data points that we provide brands at the end of a clinical study are percentages that they can use for their product claims. So for example, in a consumer perception study, a percentage might say 92% of participants felt that their skin was more hydrated after using the product for, let's say, 6 weeks. So there are really different data points that you're going to want to share based on the platform, and we'll get into a little bit more of those details later. But think about your platforms. On social media, you'll just want to share a snapshot, but on your web page, if you create a specific clinical trial web page, that's really the place where you can share all of the details about your study that are going to be more impactful for your consumer. For example, I would recommend sharing your participant demographic. Obviously, you're not going to get any individual data, but if you're looking at what your consumer demographic is, if that's matching what you tested in your clinical trial, your consumer is going to see that, and they're going to feel even more aligned with your product and feel that this is a product for them. For example, if you have a product that is helpful for women who maybe are in their 50s, 60s, and it helps with fine lines, and you tested that product with that specific demographic in your study, be transparent about that, because your consumer will feel, okay, if it worked for the participants in the study, then this will work for me as well. Also share the length of your study, the number of participants, share who you conducted the clinical trial with. Things you don't need to share are how much you paid for the trial. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious, but definitely sharing some of the highlights of the data that help show that you kept your consumer in mind when you were testing the product.
I think good rule of thumb also what to share, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bethany, but I think is clinicaltrials.gov. Many of our supplement clients actually want to get on clinicaltrials.gov. And I think all of the information that is on clinicaltrials.gov should be shared as well on these, sub pages and, kind of web pages around clinical studies, correct?
Yeah, that's a great point. If you need a rubric or a guide on what to share, visit that page and maybe find a supplement that's similar to yours, or a skincare or whatever your product is, find something similar and see the details that they shared there as well. That's a good point.
Awesome. Thank you. And then the next question is for Sam. Sam, can you provide us with some guidance on how brands can actually balance traditional, knowledge, cultural practices, evidence-based approaches to then cater to diverse consumer needs and diverse preferences?
Yes, so very much in the team member support. So it's very good to have someone on staff if you're talking about traditional medicine practices, for example, traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda. These are more commonly known these days and referred to. So it is helpful to have someone on the team who can guide the type of language to use. Something we found really useful when we're talking about products with different ingredients is that combination of has been traditionally used for and scientifically researched for specific functions, and this connection between what it's traditionally known for in terms of focusing on different systems or the understanding over time, which has often changed historically. So connecting that and then what that's led to a connection in terms of the scientific potential that's worth mentioning specifically, because they might say, for example, that it's been shown to have a specific effect on a specific condition, that it's reducing inflammation or that it's reducing symptoms. And then we can connect that it's been traditionally used for these different functions, which it makes sense because we knew before that it was beneficial. And now we've been able to study a potential mode of action that explains why it had that effect. So very sort of intentional language again, transparent in terms of what we've investigated or what the studies have shown in terms of what measurable effect it had. But then sometimes in traditional medicine, it doesn't quite fit into the scientific method, but we can very clearly link the two because we have an understanding of the traditional medicine practices and then what we've been able to investigate scientifically. And it can be very validating to trigger the curiosity of, wow, so it had that effect, but now we can see that makes sense because of, we've been able to measure this biological marker or we've been able to monitor these effects over time. And so it's amazing that they discovered that. And now we've been able to see the connection in terms of the biology and how it functions in the body more specifically, which is very exciting for science and for traditional medicine practitioners.
Definitely, yeah. So what Sam mentioned, right, with biomarkers, I think we are always getting super excited when brands involve biomarkers to really show effects in the body, not only subjective, how are you feeling, right, but really showing hard evidence that this product actually works. It helped to reduce CRP, for example, which is a marker for inflammation. Okay, now I want to move over to more visual content before we actually share some case studies. And I know Bethany is very excited about. Okay, so next question is for Bethany. What are your strategies and tips for creating visually appealing graphics, infographics that really communicate and bring across a clinical trial data?
Yeah, so you're going to get all the data, of course, all the scientific data, all the complex stuff, maybe even some graphs that you might not understand, but take that opportunity in your final report call to ask as many questions as you can, because you're meeting with our expert team and they are going to have the answers for you if you need help interpreting a graph. So take notes, take that information, spend some time with the data yourself, and it's your job to simmer it down into something that is at a glance completely understandable by your consumer. They are not going to take that dedicated time that you are with the data to fully understand it. So one thing you can do is create charts and graphs that represent the data that you got from your clinical trial, and use things like your brand guidelines, your brand colors, maybe even some infographics that you're already using on your website to illustrate that data. You don't want to overwhelm people, but you do want to share the specific details. So whether that's, you know, a pie chart that can show percentages, or even just a visual graphic that I'll show later, that illustrates the percentage, you know, with your product illustrated there as well. It doesn't have to be complex. You can take the data and make it really simplified for your consumer.
And what is the biggest mistake or the biggest mistakes that you're typically seeing that brands are doing?
I would say, well, the biggest mistake I see is they're not sharing their data. I've seen brands that go through the whole process of getting a clinical trial, and then I feel maybe they get stuck. They're not sure how to take the data and interpret it for their consumers. So they're not sharing the meat of it, or even the highlights of it on their product page. And that's really why we're creating resources like this for you, so that you can take that data and interpret it for your consumers. And as well, as I've said before, not citing their source. You know, if you have really strong product claims, but you don't have a source to back that up, it's not going to be as credible with your audience.
And Sam, from a research perspective, what drives you crazy in terms of product marketing and claims?
Yeah, good question. So I would say, linking into what I mentioned earlier of this ingredient to product claim. So this ingredient has this effect, therefore this product has this effect. So I've had quite a few experiences where I was getting very interested in a particular product or a brand, or someone was asking me, what do you think of this product or this brand? And I was like, oh, I'm actually very curious. This looks great so far. And then I saw they had scientific references next to their ingredients and their claims. And I thought, great, this is exciting. And of course, I clicked and I wanted to find what have they got? Mm-hmm. And so when I clicked on the link, for example, this has happened several times where there's multiple links to the same study. So they've found different studies and then had the links, but they haven't picked up that that's actually the same study, but in a different source. Mm-hmm. And I got the sense that they're focusing on the title only. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes in the research that they've referenced in regards to perhaps an ingredient or other aspect of their product, when I've read the trial, that the conclusion was that it didn't perform better than placebo, or that it performed worse than placebo, but the heading of the research sounded really positive. So I got the sense that the brands, found the good titles, linked it, and presumed that no one would look further. And as a practitioner who wants to have confidence in the products that I prescribe, and I'm curious as well, like I'm a potential customer as well. Every time I'm reading it, you know, I would recommend it if I see something that stands out and might be useful. So that always kind of drives me crazy, in that it's sort of a bit of a letdown of this excitement of they're engaging in evidence-based, you know, marketing. They're sharing research. They've done the effort to put that on the page, but then they haven't executed it in a way that sort of just a little bit of that letdown at the end. But also when I know that there's strong evidence for something that they're stating, but they're missing a claim, that they're missing something. Mm-hmm. I look at the brand and I see the potential of, oh my goodness, there is so much there that you could do, but you've instead focused on this sort of less than accurate statement. And I can't find any evidence. I often look for it, but yeah, I mean, the best solution for that is to have a clinical trial and have experts leading you on what you can say. And you've got so much more potential and credibility there, but it is that sort of letdown of the research, misrepresentation, and then also missed opportunities that brands could really, do so much more in its missed potential.
You know, now that you actually mention it, I came across, maybe it was even the same brand. I came across brands that cite several studies, but eventually I found out that it was actually the same study, but different outlet, different journals, right? I also thought that this was actually quite funny. Please don't do that. Please read through the evidence that you are showing and make sure that it's not actually the same. But Now, drum roll, please. We are going into case studies. Bethany, just let me know when I should click to the next slide, and the stage is all yours.
Yeah, all right. So let's take a look specifically at some examples that I've created for brands at the end of their clinical study. So like I said, when you complete a study with Citruslabs, we give you multiple product claims based on your results. And those are usually in the form of these percentages. So for example, 38% improved rest, 76% noticed improvements in pain or discomfort. So I will take usually your top three, depending on the variety that they express in your results, and create this graphic. And the reason that I create these is really to give brands a jumping off point on the simplest step that you can take to get your results implemented, because you can use this graphic on your carousel images on your product page. You can include it in your social media. Of course, it's already sized for Instagram. And it's a great way to visually show, look, these are branded to your brand guidelines, and it doesn't have to be complex. You don't even have to figure out how to make a chart or a graph or show the differences. If you can just start with illustrating those percentages in a visually appealing way, you're already off to a really great start. The other thing I'll point out is one thing that all of these have in common is using that Citruslabs tested seal. And that is a immediate visual indicator to your consumers that your product has been clinically tested. It's been clinically tested by a reputable third party. You're citing your source. You're doing all of that, and you're keeping it visually aligned with your own brand guidelines. So let's take a closer look at how I implemented these graphics. So we can go to the next slide, Susanne.
Can I just add something here as well? Because one thing that I am seeing often with brands is when they actually include more objective data measurements, right, versus more subjective data measurements. So basically the goal obviously for brands is to score as high as possible on this percentage. And sometimes brands don't feel well and they have, for example, scores like 34% improvement in C-reactive protein levels or 23% reduction in triglycerides, but that's actually pretty good numbers, right? It's like, guys, this is amazing. Or similar to sleep, 15% more sleep. This was not measured based on a questionnaire. I think I slept better. This was based on actual sleep tracking and had objective data similar to improved rest. So, sometimes when I see, especially in skincare, when I see, 100% claims, this is typically, for me personally, a red flag. And I always think it's funny when, brands do this in this extent. But then I get really excited when brands actually publish something that is not as high, because then I know that this is actually solid clinical evidence and clinical data. Okay, but back to the next slide.
Solid points for sure. So these are two graphics that I created for Armra based on their trial. And again, incorporating product images. So their powder is displayed here. Their product packaging is on the right here, incorporating brand colors, brand fonts. The Citruslab logo is included there. Or I'm sorry, the Citruslab tested seal. And so these will be implemented very easily on their webpage. So if we go to the next slide, we can see an example of how one of these graphics is used in the carousel image. So this is their product page. It blends in seamlessly with their website. And this is perfect for the consumer who is maybe new to your product, or they're just beginning the research. So they're already looking at your product page and they can see your results here on the images displayed. They don't necessarily have to go to a web page, dig through the details. Of course, you want to have that, but this already gets your consumer thinking about the trust that you are building with them, and respecting that you are confident in your product, and so you're going to test it and you're sharing those results. If we go to the next slide, I can show you another way to illustrate your results is with charts. graphs are a great way to visually show the improvements or reductions depending on what your product does. So this is, again, with ARMRA aligning with their brand colors and their brand fonts from 34 to 53%. That's a great improvement. So you can see that at a glance. Even if those percentage numbers weren't there, you can see visually the increase on the green. So that's a great way to use these, again, in something like a product page or social media, a blog, things where consumers are just starting to do their research and they want to see maybe at a glance something that will prompt them to dig a little bit deeper into finding out those studies, the study details. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you another example that we provide is before and after photos. So these are really, really strong assets for brands who want to illustrate their clinical trial results. And so specifically for ARMRA, they had a great reduction in bloating. And so we can illustrate that with a percentage. 82% of participants had less bloating. That's a strong percentage. But just to back that up even more, we want to see a visual of that. So this is a photo from one of the participants, and we can see side by side exactly what that reduction was in bloating. So this is something that could be illustrated on a section on the homepage. So you have the photos there, which prompts the consumer to kind of slow down and look, oh, okay, so I can see the difference here. And how did they get that photo? Oh, they tested their product. And you have a link here that directs to your clinical trial page, which would further outline more of the details about your study. The last thing I'll share about ARMRA is don't forget to utilize that seal in other areas too. On your product packaging, you're probably already using some other seals that explain the validity or the dedication you have with your product. For example, if it's keto, if it's vegan, 1% for the planet. Our Citruslabs tested seal fits perfectly next to those other seals and can help illustrate the validity of your product. So the next study I want to share was one we conducted with Foria, and they used their results in Instagram stories. So these were some graphics that I created for them to help illustrate first introducing their study to their followers. So they didn't want to just blast out, here are some product percentages, but giving a little bit more detail. So these were graphics created for Instagram stories. And as we all know, those only last 24 hours. So just sharing those, maybe adding in a highlight on your Instagram page, but this is just another way to share your results. So we've got the Citruslabs tested seal in there, in more details about the study so that they understand that they are a consumer that aligns with the participants in the study as well. Another way that you can share these are on Pinterest. So with their study, taking the data and sharing 3 reasons why women love intimacy melts with CBD, and taking those specific testimonials, essentially those responses in the participant questionnaires, and using them in marketing. I mean, that's a really great way to jumpstart the conversation about your product. And then lastly, taking those percentages from the final results and creating a graphic that you can use in social as well. This was something that was created for Twitter. And again, at a glance, you can see those high percentages. You can see exactly what some of those claims were. You see the Citruslabs tested seal, and you get what the product was that was tested. Next, we'll look at IOTA. This was a PDF that was created for product display and as an insert for product packaging. Inside your product packaging is a great way to really drive home to your consumer, you made a good choice. You made a great purchase. Here are the full details about our study. Here are the claims that we got from this study as well. And think about how else this can be used. If someone were to give this to a friend and share this product, then they immediately have that information about their study as well. Next, we'll look at We the People. These were graphics that I created after their study, incorporating their own brand images, colors as well. And you can see at a glance those percentages that were illustrated in their study. 89% saw increased skin smoothness. If you're looking at a razor, that's a great, that's a great result there that you can see at a glance. And on the next slide, we can see how that would be implemented in the product page again. So including these graphics in the carousel images, as someone is gaining interest in your products, they're clicking through those images and they can immediately see your results without having to go to another page.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Bethany. That was very enlightening. And how to present these clinical study results and best practices. And last question for Sam. What actual steps do you think can brands take to ensure that their marketing, that their messaging all align with that evidence-based approach, and basically avoid to mislead any consumers and basically not and really produce these substantiate marketing claims?
Yes, so definitely the gold standard is conducting research so that you've got very specific things related to your product. So actually conducting research as much as possible. Yeah, that would be the biggest one. I would say definitely citing credible sources and making sources easy to find. So making the link, and where possible, not just the link to the abstract, but the link to the full study if you're citing from journals and things like that. Where possible, cite with the full study, because curious customers are going to feel very validated and connected if you've made it easy for them to find the information they're looking for. That's also very trust building when they're finding exactly what they're looking for on the first link from your website, because then it increases the likelihood that they're going to keep coming back to you to find further information. And that's, good connection there. And then definitely the transparency is extremely important. So making the source easy to find enhances transparency, but also the intentional communication and leaning into the skepticism. So definitely, as Bethany mentioned, avoiding exaggeration in the marketing language. And as you mentioned, Susanna, the need for these high percentages is not always increasing credibility. If we've got clinical studies where we're looking at realistic expectations, and also having the progress is very helpful, where we can see the progress that over time we've got these gradual improvements, also enhances our trust and expectation management between brand and consumer. Seek expert opinions. If you're speaking on a specific topic that's very specialized, it's always helpful to have an expert that you can refer to, or multiple. So networking and having people available for that very specific information in the field, and following regulations. So being up to date with what the regulations are, and avoiding getting into situations where you've recognized something significant needs to be changed with the risk of a consequence. So keeping up to date with the regulations is also very important, and knowing what the boundaries and guidelines are on that. They would be my, I think, 6 steps.
Perfect. Yeah, and we actually talked about these regulation a lot in the past couple of months. We have, I think, 2 webinars on FTC, FDA regulations on product claims, on clinical trials. And if you're interested in that, you can just rewatch them on our website. Okay, and that is it. Does anybody has any questions? You can put them in the Q&A field, or if you want, also into the chat. Okay, I see that someone raised their hand. Unfortunately, because this is a webinar, you would need to type your question. I can't unmute you, unfortunately. Okay, and here is the question. Publication. Publication. Should consumers be able to download the actual paper? I think this is probably the best case. What do you think, Sam?
I am always very happy when I can find the full paper. That makes me excited as a researcher and as a consumer-facing practitioner as well. But I can understand sometimes it depends because, yeah, depending on the source. I would say from the Citruslabs research style, being able to access the full paper can be very helpful, but I can understand contexts where it might not be preferred. Yeah, so I would navigate that. But like personally, I love to see the full research. I love to read the methodology. And also within that is a lot of value. Yeah, but for some scientific studies or for some research, it can be a bit overwhelming and it can be confusing. So yeah, I would say I'm flexible and it depends on context sometimes, but in general, I'm a fan.
Bethany, what do you think, especially with keeping in mind to not overwhelm consumers?
Yeah, I would definitely, if you're going to provide the download, don't let that be your only way of illustrating the details. Provide that in conjunction with a web page, a dedicated web page that you have created where you're taking the data and making it more understandable, because that's going to serve two types of consumers. You're going to have the at a glance consumer who just wants the highlights and they want to know how many participants, you know, they're looking for a little bit more detail, but they're not going to take the time to read through a full paper. And then you're also going to serve the consumer, the curious consumer that Sam, it sounds like you are, who wants the full, you know, the full meal. They want to see every little part of it. So that's great to provide that, but don't let that be your only option. And one thing you want to do is track how many downloads you're getting. So if you're noticing that you're getting a lot of downloads on that, let your consumer be your guide on the kind of messaging you're going to have. So maybe they want more details. You can use that as an indicator to maybe beef up the information you're providing on that web page about your details around the study. And if your consumers are asking for it, you should be providing it.
Yeah, and then oh yeah, go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to say one more note on that and what marketing can do very well. Papers perform very well and get a lot more attention when you've got a diagram. So marketing can be really supportive in facilitating the infographics, as you mentioned earlier. And if the infographic references the study, you know, they have the option to take that extra step to pursue the details of the study. But often in terms of the mode of action and the methodology of the study, if there's an image there and it has the reference, sometimes that can be enough to get a little bit more than what the abstract could provide. So if you and your team are able to provide these infographics, this can also be, you know, an extra level of connection. And then once you want to pursue the paper, you know, making it easy that they could. But yeah, sometimes the infographic and then the link within the infographic can also, yeah, be really, really helpful.
And then one person mentioned that there might be issues with publication being behind paywalls. I agree. You do not want to, you know, upset any publishers. But for example, when you conduct a clinical study, typically you always should receive at least a clinical study report as well. And in case that, you know, you published with a publication behind a paywall, you can still publish your own clinical study report that is your own. Right. So you can decide to not have that behind a paywall. Then we have another comment that mentioned that mentioning NIH support does add to credibility if you've got it. I agree. NIH is great. Takes grant funding specifically from NIH is another absolute different topic. Can take a long time, but once you've got it, yeah, it does add to your credibility. Okay, and then one question probably for Bethany is when when you have something published, like a paper or a study report on your website, it is probably a good idea to track downloads and get an email from these people that download it, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great opportunity to have more conversation with these customers who are asking for more information about your study. So I would recommend that when you get that email, segment that customer into a workflow that's more information giving as opposed to sales oriented. If they're looking for more information, don't bombard their email inbox with, hey, buy our products. They're obviously interested in, they're doing that research, and the information they want is about your clinical study. So create a workflow, something automated that gives them more information about your study after they get that paper. But I would avoid a really hard sales push for that particular lead magnet.
Perfect. Great. And we don't have any more questions. Well, then, thank you so much, everybody. We just got one more question in. Okay, that one is interesting. So the question is, can clinical trials be done alongside similar products from competing brands, or is this a bit of a gray area? So I assume that you want to basically test your product against a competitor. This is something that is frequently done. In terms of publishing, this is obviously a little bit of a gray area, but it's it's great to obviously have these results, and I would definitely urge you to talk to an attorney about this, what kind of claims you can make. We actually work with Bustos Law Group. You might know them from our previous webinars, and they will very likely be able to help you answer that question, how you can make claims around this. Citruslabs concerning, we are frequently running these type of studies where we compare the actual product that we are testing against one or even two of their key competitors. So yes, that is possible. Go ahead, Sam.
The point I have on this as a practitioner, when I've been prescribing products to patients, something that I find really interesting when looking at studies that they have a competitor product, something that's really important is fairness. So what's very easy with marketing is that it can sort of be like, our product's better, but if the angle is more that our product is different, or that we can explain the mode of action, and it's rather than not, superiority, inferiority, it's more, we have a lot of information, and we have different information. We have specific information regarding our product. So when I'm reading it and I'm comparing, what are the results, what are the focuses are for the aims that I'm looking for, I find it very easy to navigate and trust the brand when I recognize they're not trying to be superior, but they have more information, or they're very specific about what they're able to provide.
Perfect. Thank you for that insight, Sam. That makes a lot of sense. Like literally comparing, but not saying that we are better, because that makes sense. Okay, well then, when there are no more questions, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. It was really great to have you. I hope that this was insightful. And in case you want to get in touch with us, you can visit us at www.citruslabs.com, and you can also send us a message at hello at citruslabs.com. Well then, thank you so much, everybody, for joining, and I hope to see you next time.